Thanks for tuning in for part 2, the exciting conclusion. Dun, dun, dun. So I'm starting by spraying all of the branches that I collected. I've laid them all out onto some paper. Do this in a well ventilated area. You want to spray about 20 to 30 centimeters away from the branch. Because of the shapes of the branches, you may need to go in at different angles and make sure to check it from all different angles to make sure that you've actually covered everything with the silver paint. Obviously make sure to flip the branches over as well to get the other side of them. Once the branches are finished, you can just leave them there for a moment to dry. So now I'm mixing up my gyprock. I've used this instead of some plaster because it's really strong. It's used as a cornice cement, and anyone who's done home renovations will know that this stuff is super strong. So I've mixed up according to the packet. I believe it was 2.5 kilos of cement to 1.1 litres of water. So I'm just putting some paper and things. There's a hole in the bottom of this pot because it's made for pot plants, and I don't want the cornice cement to come out. You don't really need to glue anything or anything, just sit a piece of paper and cardboard at the bottom before you pour everything in. I've just used a piece of cardboard to scrape the remainder of that cornice cement out. If you have a look, I actually wish I had have got a second packet of the cornice cement, but I know that it'll be enough because of how strong it is that I can still go ahead with putting all the branches in. But if you're doing this, make sure you get plenty of it, of cornice cement, so you can fill it up to the point that you want. So I'm just popping in the branches in. To be honest, I would say this is a two-man job. It was quite difficult to maneuver the branches by myself. I used some twine though to tie the branches at different points to get the layout that I wanted with the branches. You could also pre-tie the branches. I wanted them a little looser, I guess, so I chose not to do that before I put them into the cornice cement. And I'm using newspaper to put some gaps between the branches and help me space them out nicely. It only needs about an hour to dry, so you just need it to be secure enough that it will dry where you want all the branches. I'm pushing all of this newspaper down as well, just to make up for the fact that I have a little bit less of the gyprock than I wanted, so that helps to pad it out. I'm pushing it down enough that it's sort of soaking into the gyprock, I guess, and really padding that out. So I was pretty happy with the layout, but I wanted to pull the branches in just slightly. So I've tied a bit of twine around, but I'm not tying them as tight as possible, just enough to bring the branches in together a little. And here you can see this is just as it's drying, the layout that I have with the branches. Alright, so this is where I'm going to be putting the jewellery tree basically. So I'm just going to prune it now that I've put everything in. It's all set, and there's just a lot of twigs, so I feel like I want to remove some of them. And as you can see, they're quite long, so there's a couple that I'll just trim down a little bit. So I've just got clippers to do that. I'd recommend just taking small bits off at a time, because you can always take more off. You can't do anything if you take too much off it. Now I do want to trim this bit back here a little. Turn it up. Right, we're flying on, grab that. So I'm just getting rid of all the smaller branches, because they're a bit too small to hang anything on anyway. They're likely to snap off anyway. Okay, so you want to think about where you're going to hang the jewellery as well, so don't cut off anything that's particularly good for hanging things. If it's got a few spots that would be a good hanging place, then maybe leave it there. This one's not very helpful actually, so I might just trim it down a little. So I might just stand back and have a look at that. See how I think. It's looking pretty good. I want to just make sure there's a spot where I can sit it so it's not going to hit that window too much. So I think about there's probably going to work well, which means I can sit it exactly there and check if there's anything else I want to prune from it based on where it would sit. Some of these more flimsy long bits, this is a little too long, so it's not good. Yeah, so I think that's looking pretty good now. So in the bottom here I've got, see the newspaper, I just watered that in partly to soak into some of the corner cement and add a bit of filling there, and just to sort of pat it out. Now what I want to do to finish this off, because I've got the bark and everything, so that's sort of the base of the tree, I guess, and I want some moss and greenery and maybe some flowers sitting in this bottom part here. And I might actually paint that green, because I don't want you to really see paper, just in case it's not all covered. I do have some moss. I've also got some felting threads and things that will probably work out well for moss. See what I've got here. Same sorts of things I use in the rest of it. So the neps, what's this stuff called again? I've got the name on it here. English Leicester locks, they call it. This one as well. This is Throster's waste. So I think a bit of that, a bit of greenery, and then I've got over here preserved moss, actual preserved moss that I've used for other things. So I'm going to put some of that in there too. So I've got my paint mixed up. I just watered it down a little bit, hopefully enough that I can paint all the crevices get into all the bits of the paper. So I'm going to do that. that's pretty good. It doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to be putting all sorts of other things over the top anyway. So it's really just to cover the majority of the newspaper. I just don't want people being able to see that it is newspaper. That's the only goal with that. So on to the next part. So now I'm just adding parts of wool and silk that I showed earlier to give some texture. You can see the paper's all been painted. I'm using a little bit of hot glue to start with to try and glue these parts on, but I realised soon after that it's just not sufficient for this sort of fibre. So instead what I do is just fill it up with all of the fibres as a layer, and then go over it as I would for any sort of silk fusion work that I do, and spray it and go in with the medium. I did try at first to go straight in with the gloss medium, but then realised it does need to be wet down a little. These fibres are particularly difficult to get the gloss medium to go into them, so I'm spraying it first. You just want to spray it with water that has a little bit of soap suds in it, so just a dishwashing detergent, something along those lines, enough that it bubbles and froths, and that helps it penetrate the fibres, and then helps the gloss medium penetrate into the fibres. Continue to add texture. I'm now putting some of the PVA glue and then the preserved moss that I showed you earlier. It just adds another layer of complexity, and because it is actually moss, that it looks very good with this project, because that's the look that I'm going for, is a moss finish. So to mix that in with the fibres, I really like the look of this. The fibres have different colours, so it adds turquoises and blues and things into the moss. I also have this stuff which is similar thing. I think it was actually preserved seaweed from memory. So, I mean, this isn't required, of course, and in fact the moss, you could just use moss, or you could just use fibres. You could even just paint the inside with the green paint or something like that. It just depends what you have on hand. For this I'm using the hot glue. That seemed to work pretty well for those pieces because they're more solid pieces. And I'm now also attaching the neps with the hot glue as well in little bundles. I have these velvet leaves and I thought they would look really good as well hanging over the side. So I'm attaching a bit of hot glue, and they've got wire in them so they bend nicely over the edge of the pot. I'm also putting some of them around the branches as well. I think it just adds something, softens the look of the branches at the base there, makes them look a bit more natural and realistic. So as you can see, I've got a few flowers that I've attached on there with hot glue. For those, the hot glue works perfectly for these little flowers. I've got a mixture of things. I just checked in my stash to see what I had available, and I've got things like little velvet flowers, porcelain flowers, polymer clay flowers, and I've picked a range of bright jewel tone colours that I feel go pretty well together with this piece. I'm also continuing to add leaves, and I've found a few in jewel tones for the leaves as well, teal colours and purples and pinks, and I thought they would be fun to use in this project as well. A little fairy figurine sitting on my windowsill as well, and it was a perfect little size to sit in this fairy garden, so I thought I'd pop her in there. I now go in with an acrylic paint. This is an Opal Magic paint. It's difficult to describe. I guess it's got a little bit of an opalescent sheen, a little bit of a gold sheen to it. Again, like the way I did with the pot, I think this will just tie all those elements together. There's a lot of colours happening, and it just gives them all a shade that unifies them a little bit. can see some of the flowers that I've used are quite bright in colour, and this paint just helps to unify the colours a lot and bring the project all together. Now I've got some silver glitter. You would have seen this from a previous haul video that I did. This is sort of a glitter paste, and I'm painting this on different parts of the branches. I'm not covering every part of the branches. It's more of an accent, I guess, so that it will pick up little glints of metallic glitter, you know, as the light hits it at different angles. Now that that's all done, I've decided to add some fairy lights on here as well. These are the really slimline wire fairy lights that you may have seen around, and so they don't have the little globes. The light is actually on the wire itself, each little light. I'll see if I can add a picture on here for you so that you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm just wrapping these up and down some of the branches, and I end up using 2 sets of fairy lights. You want to make sure that the battery pack at the bottom is accessible, because it does have a switch on there, so you need to be able to turn it on and off. So there we go, there's your finished jewellery tree in all its glory. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Bye craft nerds!